Hello, MotoAmerica fans. It's time for another episode of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and you may even learn something from this unlikely pair and their special guest. The mic is yours, Paul and Sean.
Hello, MotoAmerica fans, and I'm not sure if you realize this, but Virginia is for lovers, and Virginia is for road racing, and that's where we are this weekend at Virginia International Raceway. And as always, I'm joined by our communications manager, Paul Carruthers, on the other side. And this guy in the middle you may have seen before. He's been on our podcast a few times. He also does a lot in our broadcasts for MotoAmerica now, and he works with riders. And he's going to be racing this weekend, and it's Josh Hayes, four-time Superbike champion. 83 all-time AMA wins. He is second only to Miguel Duhamel in that category. And maybe he can get a little closer to Miguel this weekend, and that's what we're going to talk to Josh about. So, Josh, you were at Daytona. I got to tell you something. I watched Daytona again. And
something shiny.
And you could have won that race, Josh. Do you know that?
It's the only reason I showed up.
Right, right. And you know the draft better than anybody. We got to talk about that. I mean, you were positioned. Let's hear from you. What happened on that last?
Well, I mean, I felt like the last lap didn't tell the story of my race. You know?
Right.
But after a pretty solid race, I kind of knew I was in trouble. When we went through the infield, at kind of a normal pace, like a 150 minute 50 second pace. And when we got out onto the west banking, about halfway around, I think it was Sheridan, Cameron, me, and Brandon behind me. And Cameron pulled out of the draft, and about the timing that he did that, Sheridan shut it down to about half throttle because nobody wanted to lead anymore. And I wouldn't have had a problem with leading. The problem that I had was when Cameron had pulled out of the draft, I was still in Sheridan's. And so now I had Sheridan slow down, Cameron go, no, I'm not going to go past you. And then I had the wall on the right. So I was kind of boxed in, not knowing where Brandon was. And we were now going really slow on the banking. We weren't accelerating anymore. So I kind of knew I was in trouble. And we all just kind of went through the chicane in our positions as we were. And as we came out, everybody was kind of looking at one another like, okay, who's going to go? I already knew I was in a little bit of trouble. My gearing was, I think, a tooth taller than the other Yamahas, and it was kind of the way we had worked out our strategy on the weekend. I had pretty good legs on top. I've been able to pass a lot of guys and play a part at the checkered flag a lot more than I had in previous races. But I was hurting a little on acceleration, so especially I would say out of turn 6, second gear turns, turn 5, turn 6, the west horseshoe, and then going on to the west banking, I struggled a little bit. Coming out of the chicane, I struggled a little bit, but I had pretty good legs on top. And when they slowed it down again on the main primary banking after the chicane, and it came down to a matter of just a jump, that really played into the hands of Brandon. I think that the three Yamahas, we had really good legs, and if we had done a normal lap in the 150 pace with us drafting each other, just my feeling of how it had all played out to that point, I think it would have been a Yamaha 1, 2, 3. But everybody's kind of thinking how they want to win the race, and when they slowed it down, they kind of played into his favor a little bit. So, and I ended up being the loser in that one.
You felt like, I mean, okay, I'm not going to do the math, but your birth date is April 4th, 1975. You just celebrated a birthday. I'm not going to do the math on it, but my point is, you haven't retired yet. We know that. You're not going to do well. Yeah, maybe someday you will.
I mean. There's no greener pasture, you know what I mean? Like there's not retirement. No, I'm enjoying getting to do all the different things I get to do in this industry, and if I get to ride, then that's great, you know. So.
Part of it though is you're arguably doing way more than you were doing when you were a factory rider for Yamaha, aren't you?
I'm much busier. That life was simple.
Right.
You know, you train to be a motorcycle racer, and once in a while, I had to be a husband. That was the extent of my life right there. So your identity is all just wrapped up in a pretty simple package. And now, you know, I'm a husband, father, homeowner, you know, like all these other things that come into it. I'm coaching and mentoring a lot of guys. helping with logistics on other things, and there's a lot of things that people protected you from and kept the pressures away from you when you were trying to be a selfish athlete. So a lot of that stuff's changed, but knowing we were doing Daytona and that it wasn't just on our bike, we were going to do it with a team of people who were relying on me to show up and be me. I got to do quite a bit of training and do some preparation, and I actually felt really good when I got to Daytona. I felt like the old me. And so even with our little infraction that happened and starting on the back of the grid, I tried to impress on the team that I wasn't too concerned. I felt like I was there to do, 57 hard laps, that I would be okay. And I never could have dreamed I would be in third place on lap 4.
Yeah, that was crazy.
It was a quick run through
and it was so funny because as it was happening, things, it just, a lot of serendipity. Everything lined up exactly how I needed it to. Right off the start, I actually ran off turn 1, but I still managed to make a position or two, even going wide out on there because everybody just bunched up. Just placed myself in the right place, and then there were no big gaps. So every time I made a move, I was immediately in the draft of another bike and able to just leapfrog and work my way through. And the only time I really got back to anything that was difficult was when I got up to 3rd, 4th, 5th. And found myself, I was transported right back to 2009. I had Cameron and Max riding really well, about a second and a half in front of us, and here I am battling with Josh Hayes and Danny Eslick. And they were not interested in what was going on a second and a half up the road. It was dab you, right there. It was like old times. It was pretty funny.
Well, this year, so, one of the things about you is you're very analytical as a rider and as a coach, obviously. So I want to talk about this whole Supersport next generation. It's a big thing to uncrack. But at Daytona, I was absolutely amazed at how kind of equal things were. And maybe we understand what happened to Josh Hayes with running out of gas. I don't know if he would have won the race. But my point is we had a pretty good mix-up of makes and displacements of motorcycles in that race. And I mean, the R6 can still get it done, it seems like.
I thought the parity at Daytona worked out better than I ever could have imagined it would, quite honestly. I thought, considering it was the first time anything had been run under the rules package, I couldn't believe how well they had done. There were bikes that had advantages in areas, but at some point, every bike had a place where it could be competitive and have an advantage in some way, and everything was competitive. I don't think there was a bike that wasn't. I thought that probably the one that I saw that I thought had the clearest advantage, quite honestly, was Max Angles. The 636 having a little extra capacity, but allowed all the same things that the 600s are allowed to boost them up, where they're bringing the other stuff down with the controlled ECUs. They not being able to control that with the ECU, it has a little bit of an advantage. And right. I thought on speed, especially at like Daytona, this is not taking anything away from Max, who I thought was riding really well, but the bike clearly had big speed. And for me, it was the most difficult one on the track for me to be able to get myself into a position to make a move on. I could play with all the other bikes pretty evenly, and I spent quite a bit of time. I rode with Josh. I rode with Danny quite a bit. I got to see Brandon on track, and we had not seen the GSXRs, the big GSXRs, show up yet. And so this will be I got to watch it on the side of the track a little bit with Lockoff at Road Atlanta. But here will be the first time for me to kind of see it on track and see how it does. But, it's kind of unique to MotoAmerica, where they're not having those in the other championships. So it might take a little bit of time to sort that out and, for the leveling to really get proper. But, anytime you have this, where you're going to have this electronic way of leveling these motorcycles and there's adjustments, you're going to have winners and losers. There's going to be the bike to be on for a couple of weekends, and then it might get adapted or changed and not be so great for a couple of weeks, and it's going to kind of play its way out a little bit for a little while, I would imagine.
Now, it seems like the position you're in is kind of cool because you get to kind of pick and choose what you want to do. I mean, yeah. You're obviously not on a full Supersport schedule, or you would have raced at Road Atlanta, so you get to pick and choose, and you've had great success here. Yeah. Did that play into it, hey, let's go do VIR, or it didn't work that way?
Well, after Daytona, I mean, the Peter Strack, Jordan, Josh, RB, all the guys, the whole Squid Hunter team, we all had a really good time. I was impressed with what a great motorcycle they showed up and provided me. It rivaled some of the pro teams I've ridden with. It was a fantastic machine. We did a day of testing. We got through 3 days at the racetrack with no snafus, and the bike was it performed well. It was a winning motorcycle, I felt. So they seemed to enjoy working with me, and for the first time, that team's done the Daytona 200 for a few years. It's the first time that it was the same spec as the rest of MotoAmerica's championship. So we had a motorcycle that we could go race, and it was like, hey, you guys want to do something else? And we all discussed it and said, yeah, we'd like to do that. Road Atlanta was a bit of a quick hop for us to get it done. There is still some differences with all the chassis stuff and the quick change and the things like that needed to get transferred over. And they're not a full-time pro team like you have here. So we talked a little bit. I kind of made some jokes with Peter about, he's like, well, would you want to do Road Atlanta or Virginia? And I go, really, honestly, it's kind of up to you. If you want to do both, that's good. I go, if you want to do one or the other, they're both really good racetracks for me. They're from Florida, so these are both East Coast, kind of close to them racetracks. And I said, the biggest problem you're going to have is if you decide to do both, you're going to be in big trouble because I'm going to be leading the points and you're not going to be able to quit. And he goes, right. So about 3 weeks later, I get, hey, let's do Virginia. I was like, all right, sounds good. But no, I mean, I think this is kind of like the more fun they have, the more they'll want to do. And I feel lucky, that I get to go out and race a motorcycle again. And it's fun for me because honestly, hindsight's 20/20, and in my career, I had learned a lot of things and done a lot of things, but I was pretty set in my ways on a lot of those things too, where I would test a part, and if it didn't perform the way I was expecting it to, I'm like, no, I feel like I don't have time to mess with that. And now, having watched so closely at such close, from just barely outside, and listen and hear a lot of the things that go on the racetrack, I feel like there are a lot of things that I've learned in the last few years that I'm excited to get a chance to try to apply for myself and understand some of those things better. And so I feel like on a technical standpoint, I can be a better rider than I was when I was winning.
So that's funny.
Pro.
So with all the experience and success you had, you maybe have gotten better by not doing it.
Well, by listening and learning from the pros that are out there now,
right?
Because when how they do things different than I did it.
And when you're in it the way you were in it, there's probably not a lot of listening going on, right?
Well,
I mean,
you try to, but you don't deviate from what's working very much either.
Right.
Your focus is pretty narrow. And so this has been able to open my eyes up to some new ideas and allow me some time to kind of digest it and understand it and say, okay, how can I apply it and make it work? So I'm kind of enjoying that I get to grow with the technology a little bit at the same time. I get to watch some of the guys. I mean, my riding style anyway was honestly just coaching wasn't a thing when I came up racing.
Right.
So we learned from our peers that just what we saw on racetrack. We'd see somebody do something and go, shit, I don't know if I can do that, but I got to go try to figure it out. And we did. And you learned a lot that way. And my riding was a mix of all the people I raced against. They were my heroes. When I got to pro racing and I got on track with Miguel and Matt and Nikki and, Jamie Hacking, Aaron Yates, the Bostroms, Doug Chandler, like all of them had something that you would see and go, man, I want that in my bag of tricks. And the more of those you have, like the more tricks you got, right? So my riding was a mix of all of those guys and finding my favorite things that I saw firsthand on track those guys do and tried to keep it for myself. And now I've been doing it a little bit from the side. And honestly, as much as you can see with the eyes, my ears, I think, are probably the thing that I'm using the most. I can be listening to the guys, what they're doing with the throttle and things like that have been a really key role in me learning some new things, and I'm excited to go out there and try to adapt those things into practice.
Yeah, I was wondering if it'd be difficult to do practice what you preach kind of thing. And you preach to these guys certain things, and then is it hard to actually go do it yourself?
Sometimes, and not always, but sometimes. I mean, I still have some habits that are just like, always trying to make up that bike length or two. And there are times where we talk about the trade-offs. I did think about those things, but honestly, when you get into a Superbike versus 600, it's a little bit easier to play those trade-offs pretty quickly, and the 600 is a little harder. you give up 1 or 2 here to gain 2 or 3 here. It ends up only being a bike length or 2 in the wash. Where the Superbike, it can be a greater deal. So, I mean, but no, I still believe in the things that I'm passing along. A lot of them are based on experience, and but I'm also learning from them and trying to figure out how those things fit together and adapt it. And not a lot of those guys get the opportunity to compete whenever you're doing that and actually put it into practice. So I'm thankful to have that shot.
So when you were with Yamaha and you were in the middle of kind of your run of success in Superbike and you're winning a lot of races, breaking records, looking at that time period versus now, are you happier now as a person than you were then? About the same? Do you think you're more fulfilled now? Where are you as a person compared to then? Because I keep thinking you were so focused at that time period. It was like just laser focused on what you were doing.
Yeah,
but now,
no, and I still feel that guy inside, you
right.
know. But no, I don't think so. I mean, I've got family and I've got a lot of things that are going on in life that are the natural transitions in life. You can move on to the next thing, But I still feel all those feelings, and my transition happened overnight.
Right.
I finished at Barber. I was a Superbike racer. We went to dinner that night as a team and had kind of our team dinners that we would do anytime somebody left the team. And the next day, everybody was testing, and I wasn't a part of it.
Right.
And the next day I woke up and it was like, here's my super pregnant wife. Everybody's testing, and I'm going to be the guy that helps the kids on R3s. It really quickly transitioned for me, which was really not that easy. And I mean, I feel some of the same pressures from inside myself to perform well. It was easier at that time to put a position on that. When you're in the thick of it, it was easy to go, I expect to win today because I know where everybody else is and where I am because I get to see it week in and week out. Where coming into this, I have the hope and I have the belief that I think I can win these races here this weekend based on Daytona. I feel motivated. I've trained. I feel good. But I got to get on track with the guys and see what's actually happening out there.
I bet you're chomping at the bit to do that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I am. But it's hard for me to say, oh yeah, I'm coming here and I'm going to win all these races because I raced some of these guys at Daytona. Daytona is kind of its own unique program, and coming here to VIR is a very physical track. It's going to be really hot, and I think a lot of the habits that were ingrained into me that the going through the motions that I went through in the past has always served me pretty well. I jumped on a MotoGP bike. I didn't do too bad. I just went through my routine. And if I show up here and I go through my routine, I think I'm going to be competitive. And it should put me in a position where I could possibly win. The big thing was when I looked at Road Atlanta, I really didn't see anything super impressive as far as lap times go.
Right.
And so if they give me a chance, it could be dangerous for them.
Well, this is what I want to talk about. So VIR, Paul in his preview chronicled the fact that you've had a lot of success at VIR. You won a couple, 2 races in Supersport. I think it was your last 2 races in Supersport here. Your last Superbike race here, or Superbike race weekend here, that was your last victory. So you know this track, you like it, so you're going to be racing here. You're also racing against a guy who won the last 2 rounds, who was a former teammate of yours, a guy that kind of followed in your footsteps a little bit, got a championship in the middle of your run, a guy that you've coached recently. I don't think there's anybody that knows Josh Herrin better than you do. So my question to you is, what's Josh Herrin, what's that going to be like?
As well as you can know Josh Herrin.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I know he's an enigma, but I totally get that. But you know him better than anybody. And I think as far as racecraft and what you know, what you've seen of that bike, you're going to be out there in this R6. What's the plan?
Well, I mean, I got to see it at Daytona, and I feel like I have a bike that's every bit competitive with it.
Okay.
I think that Josh is the most experienced rider in the Supersport class. And if he goes through his motions, he's going to be competitive. And, I mean, we saw that, I think, at Road Atlanta. I think in the first session he did, 5 timed laps. But I remember watching, and he had gone out and come in several times. And when he was over almost 2/3 of the way through the session, he got his first flying lap in, and it went red, 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 fastest lap in the 29s at that point. And I went, okay, not something in my time that Josh has really been known for, to go out and jump up to speed super fast. So I go, okay, I feel like if I were out there, I would be in a good position right now to make this hard. So I think, I haven't been here in a long time. I got on the podium both times in 2019 in Supersport here when we showed up with our own bike. I actually got on the podium in both races there. I got second in the rain to Hayden, and I think I got third in one race to PJ and Bobby. But, overall, this is a pretty good racetrack for me. I am in a much better place than I was in 2019.
Right.
We haven't had the strain of the logistics of the motorcycle. I have a crew that's built me a great bike, and I'm confident of that. And I've gotten to ride my 600, and I got to race Daytona, and I've gotten to ride quite a bit more. I actually, after Daytona, I picked up Rocco Landers, and I spent time on my 600 on track chasing Rocco, which hasn't been easy. I did 6 days at the racetrack with him. So I have actually gotten quite a bit of riding in at a pretty good pace. And one of the hardest things that I found was I do a lot of coaching on Dunlop Q4s on my stock R1, and I can go pretty darn fast on those things. But whenever I would jump back on a race bike, like when I got to ride the Attack Superbike, I struggled a bit with how much grip you have in the front and how much you can load the front tire and get away with. And it was really hard to make myself go there, not being practiced at it, because I haven't ridden a Superbike in anger in a long time. So that's been the hardest thing. So if I can make that transition pretty quickly, I feel like I can be competitive quickly here at VIR.
So here's something that I'll readily admit to you guys, and I'll admit it to the fans watching this and listening.
Big admission here.
Yeah, big. I'm going to follow my sword. I look at
I had cereal for breakfast.
Confession.
I don't eat breakfast. But, no. So we look at we have records. We look at what the fastest lap times are in each class going into a round. And I continually see in Supersport, it's Garrett Gerloff, JD Beach, 2017. And I'm like, we now have 750s and a 955 in Supersport. Why are those records?
You've neutered those motorcycles, though.
Well, that's
they are not full blown.
Well, I get it, but what's going on with your bike compared to like Garrett Gerloff's time period?
I don't know. I was kind of focused on my Superbike at the time.
Right.
But those two guys were pushing each other at a world-class level.
Right.
And there is a huge transition in level of let me not say level, but the number of experienced guys in each class, right? Like there was a time where there was like a mass exodus, and then there was like myself, Roger, and Larry Pegram were the three old school guys that were left here. Everyone else came from when we did our Rookies Cup here. You look at Gagne and Gerloff and JD and in that crew, and then you look at Sean and Richie, and they didn't get to see like the transition was kind of like slow and muddy for a lot of years, and then there was like this cliff and a new transition into a new group, and technology changed at the same time with tires and things like that. So the transition, I don't know like where the lap times necessarily go to and come from, but they have. Given enough time, we did get to see Supersport.
Yes.
Sean and Richie get in there and finally get to some lap record pace and some stuff like that. But Sean got a year of Bobby or so did Richie. They got a year of like Bobby and Hayden Gillum and some other experienced guys who had gotten to ride with my crew and my group before that of experienced guys, a larger pool of experience. And so they find their way a little bit more quickly, But I think that you ride up to your competition.
Yeah.
And if there's not a couple of you pushing each other, then everybody's going to settle in and get comfortable where they are.
Right.
And so they really have to start taking some risk and chances and going, okay, I'm going to figure out how to get there, hell or high water.
This is interesting because Josh once told me, he talks about the wing nut behind the handlebars as one of the adjustments you can make.
I said it's the most adjustable thing on the bike is the wing nut behind the handlebars.
And the question I had was I was more asking about what I'm trying to understand about the performance of the motorcycle. And even we can focus on the R6. I didn't know if there was something in MotoAmerica's rules that are preventing the times from being what they were in 2017. You went right to the rider, which is a fair assessment. I didn't think of that, but I mean, is there something?
It's usually what it is.
Right, but I didn't know if there's something with maybe what
I
our
don't think
rules
technology
are.
has gone backwards.
Well, I wouldn't think so, but I didn't know.
I don't think so. I think that there were a couple of years there, I think, where the Supersport bikes were allowed some things that made them pretty fast.
Right.
I was pretty focused on Superbike,
Right.
so I wasn't paying a lot of attention to it. But there were some things, and the Graves crew were pretty adamant of taking care of all the things. They still had a lot of help from Yamaha, a lot of support to be able to make that program happen, and they stretched those bikes hard, as do M4.
Right.
And but I mean, the big thing I see right now is the turnover in the youth in the class, and the guys coming up. I'm also unpopularly not a believer that like Junior Cup is a very good building point jumping into Supersport. I'm seeing a lot of people having difficult time whenever they go to Supersport from that. I don't think that today's Junior Cup bikes are teaching fantastic habits of what it takes to be successful on higher end motorcycles. Twins Cup is growing pretty big. Stock 1000 is growing pretty big, and it is a better, I think, learning way to get there. Now, I'm a lover and believer in middleweight racing.
Right.
So I'm a strong believer in Supersport, and the technology that was there was at near the highest level, near the 1000s and the Superbikes for a lot of years, and so I like and want to see a lot of depth in the Supersport class. And it's probably my favorite class to ride. I wanted to be in Superbikes because that's where the fast guys were,
Right.
and I wanted to race the fastest guys in the world. But I probably for the pure, like, Supersport racing is pure racing to me, and I really enjoy being a part of that.
Well, let's think about this. So, and I know you bleed blue. You're Yamaha blue, so I understand where you're going to come from. But I want to compare two things. You raced at one time a Honda Formula Extreme bike, which was, for all intents and purposes, a mini superbike.
Yep.
Was that bike still, performance-wise, a little bit of a step above the R6 Supersport bike now? Can you even remember that?
No, man, we went so fast on those things. We went so fast on those that we struggled on Superbikes for a few years there. One thing that happened was the transition when Dunlop shut down the UK factory and we went to the US-made tires. It took a little bit of time. The UK factory had been building race tires for decades, and the materials, all the things that have to happen in race tire development that they got there and were sourced there worked. And whenever it happened in the U.S., it took quite a few years to catch up. Now, the U.S. tires have gotten incredibly good, I think, personally. I know they are different than like the Dunlops that are running Moto 2, but they definitely have some very good strong points. We were able to see lap record pace at the end of races with our tires. The consistency of the tire has been fantastic. And it took a little bit of time for them to grow and get there. So now we're seeing Superbikes breaking track records again and things like that because we're finally getting to that point. But it took a long time for Cameron to catch up to where I got to, I want to say in 2012 at MotoAmerica, on the UK rears, front end rears. Man, I believe I've gotten to the 10s, maybe the 9s at that racetrack a long time ago. And I know that the technology has gotten better in the machines up to that point. The track hasn't deteriorated too much. So I think it took a little bit of time for that tire technology to catch up. And then along with that, the electronics are kind of coming along with it. So I think one thing is the bikes are getting so complicated. With all the electronics that are involved, I feel like it is very easy for even at the top level teams for the focus to get to be so much on electronics and traction control and all these other rider aids available that the chassis gets kind of left to the side from time to time.
Right.
And so we're not getting the most out of the machines that we can get all of the time. And some of that's just going to be a learning process, but also, again, when you get a rider that goes, okay, I know I want TC, but I need the power because I need to go with this guy at this point. the true competition is what's going to bring that out at some point.
And keep in mind, everybody, that this is a situation, this is a guy who's had enough experience that he raced in a time period where there wasn't any electronics. And I think he even liked it that way. I mean, the wheels were still round back then, by the way, I'll admit that. But
technology happens for a reason. You can't stop it.
Right.
And the stuff is good. But let's just say when you get it into the racing application and how much adjustability we have, it's easier to get wrong than it is to get right sometimes.
Yeah.
And so as someone who now is working with the coaching and kind of a little bit on the technical aspect of understanding what's happening, everything is getting really tricky rather than keeping it simple. And as much as people talk about wanting it simple, they love it tricky. They love having the new technology and all these cool little parts and gadgets that are sometimes unnecessary, I think.
For a long time, like a kid that was coming up and was fast would jump on a Supersport bike and just ride it. Just ride the crap out of it. And some of those guys, when they would go to Superbike, they would fail because the stuff got too tricky. So now there's the potential, I think, as what you're kind of saying is you could go down the wrong rabbit hole as a kid now on a Supersport bike because you're not just able to just go ride it. You have to think about different things like electronics and
it doesn't just fall on the rider. Everybody wants to contribute. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty competitive now because there's so few, technical side people, but they want to contribute. Your crew chiefs and guys like that really want to help you. And they have, I think a little bit of it, sometimes it gets forgotten that I don't need the best bike on the track. I just need a good one to show what I can do. But if I don't ride the same bike 2 or 3 times in a row, how can I ever figure out how to get the most out of it? Like, even I'm not good enough to go out and ride one bike one time and go, okay, nobody can go faster than that. You got to give me a little time to work into things and get there. And everybody's so quick to go, oh, I feel this. Oh, let's fix that. Rather than go, okay, is this a problem I need to fix or do you need a few more laps? And the guy's got to be confident enough to go, okay, yeah, give me a little more time. Let me see if I can figure this out.
It's like repaving the track instead of just riding around the bump.
A little bit, it's there's a healthy mix of all of those things, but the complication basically, I think, is part of what can be stunting and holding things back. I think the technology is good. It's figuring out how to get the most out of it and being pushed and driven by the right factors around you, So we'll get there.
We're running out of time, but I want to touch on this since you talked about electronics. I want to bring it into Moto2 for a minute and just ask a couple questions. I want to get your feeling about Cameron Beaubier and also Sean Dillon Kelly. Sorry, lost my mind for a minute. And Joe's doing great, but I'm just talking about, you mentioned about 600. So I thought, okay, and I think a lot of people felt this. Sean Dillon Kelly went from Supersport into Moto2, fairly comparable a little bit. I mean, no traction control to worry about. Cameron kind of had to unlearn all the electronics that we were just talking about. I thought that Sean might go in there and start off maybe doing a little bit better. And I'm not trying to rag on him, but I just, do you think it's just Moto2? It's tough. It's such a tough series because they're all the same engines and what they're dealing with. Did you think he was going to do better, I think, to start with, because he didn't have to unlearn some things electronically? Because they don't have traction control, by the way, which is the point I'm getting at.
I don't think that has anything to do with it.
Okay.
Personally. Things are coming around for Cameron. He's starting to get a little more steady. Like, I think there's a lot to just traveling the World Championship. And Cameron was a homebody. He liked being home. You know? So this was a good transition that needed to happen, but it wasn't one that I think he was super excited about at first for the fact of not being around home for a long time. So, but I think there were some team aspect things that changed during the year, so it made it a little tough, and he finally has gotten to a point where he's getting a little more steady and things are starting to happen for him a couple weeks in a row. Joe's got quite a few years there that he's been knocking it out. Sean, man, I have a lot of belief in Sean. I'm a fan of Sean.
Yeah.
And I think he is better than what we're seeing right now. I don't know the hows or whys we got there. I watched pretty close for quite a bit. I know that he went over there early. He had a Moto2 bike that he just rode at track days. He went with one guy and he just went and rode at track days. And when he showed up at his first official test, which was their last test in Jerez at the end of the year, he was like P9. He was in the top 10. He was well in front of Cameron and was actually riding really well. And from what I have seen, I don't know the hows or whys, but progressively every weekend has been worse. He's going in the wrong direction. And I don't think it's because Sean's not a good motorcycle racer.
Right.
I don't think it's because he can't adapt to a Moto2 bike.
Right.
I don't know enough about what's going on around him to understand what's happening. But I'm upset, not at Sean, at what I'm seeing, because I think he's better than that. And I felt the same way about Cameron last year. I know how good Cameron is, and so seeing him struggle and run around outside of the top 20 wasn't exactly how I pictured it. That's not the Cameron Beaubier I know, and I don't think that that's Sean either. I think Sean is better than that, and he can be competitive, but there are so many things that have to go right, and then it is easy to get beaten down when you're 0.8 off and you're outside of the top 15, because in our paddock, with the depth that we have, 0.8 off is, you're not going to be outside the top 5.
Exactly.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, it's very ultra competitive, no doubt.
We got to end.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up here. So we're at VIR this weekend. Obviously, Josh Hayes is going to be out on the track racing in Supersport. There's 2 races. Subscribe to MotoAmerica Live Plus so you can catch those races. And absolutely, this is something we all want to see, because this class is real interesting. There's a lot going on in it, and we obviously have Josh Herron, who's a former teammate, who's shown to be kind of the guy, the rabbit that they're chasing right now. And
you know what my favorite part is? He mentioned it on the podium and in the press conference that I was coming this weekend, so he's thinking about it.
Oh, yeah. and let's watch this guy with the mind game, because his mind game is pretty strong. So
if you look at my Strava, I hit it pretty hard the last couple of weeks too.
And he's rocking this hairdo now. It's looking pretty good. He's looking like a serious racer.
I tell
again.
my guys plan for success. So
absolutely,
shave it up, clean it up, be ready to win.
And listen, if there's a chance, and there may be, I mean, you'll see Josh. He does some stuff with Robbie Floyd. I don't know if you do
usually coffee
talk.
time.
Yeah, so that'll be this weekend too. So on top of everything else Josh is doing, you'll see him on some other parts if you're on MotoAmerica Live Plus, and please subscribe again. Thanks everybody, and it's great to have Josh. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Paul.